All right, please grab your seats. So we make reference to the animal. We have what's supposed to be the animal house. We have about 20 minutes to share the highlights and insights that we gained from Yoshiro's presentation, and then coupled with our group conversation. We had 4 groups with us in the room, and we had 4 groups with us on Zoom. And so 8 groups is a lot to hear from in terms of reporting out. We originally had a different process in mind, but time got away from us a little bit, and that's okay. So if you are the designated spokesperson for your group, we will in turn invite you to, it's best to come stand up here and just share, a quick highlight or insight, or maybe a question came up in your group. And it will be interesting to see what alignment we had between our conversations. And maybe in one group, some totally different thing came up that none of the other groups thought to address. So we'll just see how that goes, and we'll manage our time accordingly. If you are with us on Zoom, hopefully within your breakout groups, you appointed a spokesperson. And if you are that designated spokesperson, please indicate that in the chat now. You could just say, I'm it. It puts your name, obviously, in the chat whenever you write anything. So just claim it, and we will call on you in due turn. And Barb, do we have anyone yet who is claiming to be the spokesperson for their group?
No.
All right, well, we need someone, because I'm sure. What's that?
Sean Ingram.
Sean. Let's start with Sean. Sean, thank you for acknowledging that you either were the designated spokesperson or are willing at least to step up and be that. And Sean, if you would, please unmute your camera and join us here in the space. And just quick little, again, highlight, insight, comment, question relative to the questions Yoshiro posed to us.
Hello, everybody. Well, just first off, I'm Dr. Kano's newest grad student working on this project. I'll be starting in January, so nice to meet you all. I would say highlights from our discussion. Dustin from Lichterman from Chesapeake Bay mentioned that it'd be really good to get accurate, on the ground, up-to-date spring input data, in terms of what information we could have better access to. And then Judd mentioned something about how, if precipitation and groundwater, their relation, and potentially the age of the groundwater, that could be good information for us to have as well. So I'd say those were sort of the 2 biggest highlights from our discussion.
All right. Any comments or need for clarification from what Sean just shared? I have one, Sean. Did you feel an obligation to be the spokesperson, given that you're Dr. Kano's graduate student? Was there?
Of course not.
For that?
Of course not. It was purely my desire.
Excellent. Well answered, Sean. All right. Thank you very much. And let's go now to one of the spokespeople from the room. Who was the spokesperson for the blue group? All right. That's Matt, right?
Yes.
All right, Matt, come on down. Give us your highlights and insights.
Highlights and insights. So what we talked about in our group was basically kind of thinking about things in terms of like the restoration or protection strategies. Basically asking questions like what thermal conditions are at most risk of changing, and managers want to know how to tease out where there's going to be persistent cold water habitat versus habitat that's already lost, in terms of managing those priorities, and at the same time also finding those resilience factors for things that are in the realm of influence for managers, so things that can be changed as opposed to things that cannot, like climate change, and then identifying where there are groundwater resources, and in terms of identifying where thermal conditions are most stable for suitable habitat for that species. So,
any comments or questions or thoughts for the blue group? Okay, let me ask this: how you? Thanks for checking in though first. Helpful to hear other groups' conversations. You had your own, and just to see what their thinking was, and again how it aligned or diverged from your own. I want to make sure that we're using the time that we have well for this conversation. Okay, let's go. Barb, do we have another candidate online? Seth. All right, Seth, if you would, please unmute your camera, join us and share the highlights and insights or questions or comments from your group's conversation.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so we talked about types of data sets, temperature data sets we're collecting. We had folks from New Hampshire, Vermont, Connecticut, and then Tennessee, and myself in Virginia. And a lot of folks collecting have reference sites or sentinel index sites or streams that they're looking at with population data, and also taking stream temperature data. Kind of a big one that came up was like, where do we put our limited, resources of people and time in, monitoring data, trying to build long-term data sets. Some folks were sampling some of their best kind of blue ribbon type streams, and if those are stable, populations with good cold water resiliency, should a lot of effort continue to be put into those, or should it be moved more towards the marginal ones where restoration management strategies could help move the needle to create more thermal resiliency for repatriation or strengthening of brook trout populations? So that was kind of the main stuff we talked about. How to prioritize, how you collect that data. Jim mentioned in Tennessee doing some work with trying to reinvigorate some of their temperature monitoring work, looking at candidate sites for reintroduction or strengthening populations. But that it takes a lot of effort to kind of build that long-term data set to look at temperature change over time. I think those are the highlights.
All right, anything for Seth and his group? Seth, thank you very much.
Yep.
Now back to one of our participants from the room. Who's the spokesperson for the yellow group? All right, Mike, come on down.
Is this just first question or both?
If you have thoughts on the second question, feel free. Sure.
So I'm gonna do my best here. There's some acronyms I'm not necessarily super aware of, but I think we had a good discussion. I think the first question we had, and there's a lot of folks that kind of suggested to leverage and expand the PASA model, which is a temporal interannual index of stream flow, air and water temperature, I believe. And then maybe kind of extending that and relating that to some of the patterns that have been done to understand trends of temperature for both air with water and also stream flow. In terms of the study design and kind of the unit or the geographical scale of some of your abundance data, we thought about it at the PAT scale because at least in the Northeast, we kind of think about things a lot in the PAT framework, but then also maybe a catchment would also be a nice thing because catchments could roll up into patches, but I think in any event, trying to marry the two together would be beneficial for some of the managers. And that is all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Thanks to the yellow group. Any questions related to that? All right, so we're 4 down and 4 to go. Yoshiro, you're our customer right now. You posed the questions and are looking for feedback from the group. Are you getting what you were hoping for?
Yes, yeah, especially like, I was kind of curious with the pack scale, there's a general agreement that that's the best stage of resolution to go.
Okay,
Okay, is that? Okay.
Finer. No, I think Mike just said that the managers prefer the catchment scale, right? But then if we can marry that to the patch scale, right?
Okay. I see.
Is that?
yeah. Say it again, Mark.
I think they actually manage at a patch level more than the catchment level. They're not having a special reg that changes over catchments. It's a patch as their treatment population, and you're usually doing a classification or sampling of that as a patch. So I would think the patch, but if you get to the patch, there's going to be variables that the catchment will come out. But I think the Berkshire joint venture has pretty much decided patch is their unit of measurements and things like that, and populations, stuff, but
Yeah, I think what was kind of said was that the patch would be ideal, right from the water to the catchment, roll up into the patches, so like that would be an alternative that could be like get both spatial scales.
Okay, well, as I said, we're 4 down, 4 to go. If you're still one of those 4 remaining groups, bring forward anything that hasn't already come up. Obviously, if it's been mentioned, then we don't need to necessarily acknowledge it again, unless you feel it warrants some kind of reinforcement. So we're gonna go back to an online participant now. Bart, who's our next contestant?
Helen.
Helen. All right, Helen, go ahead and unmute and join us.
Hi, everybody. Thanks.
There you are. Welcome.
Yeah, we also talked about the pasta resource, which seems like a great thing to add a little bit of characteristic to the groundwater. Questions as well about what other data might be available in terms of like drone-based thermal imagery for some areas, or LiDAR, which is available in some parts of New Hampshire, it sounds like, and we weren't sure where else. There's also some groundwater layers from USGS in Maine, specific to base flow and sand and gravel. I think I'm not as familiar with those, but pretty broad geography covered, at least for that state. I think that's the only thing, it just dawned on me as I was hearing the other questions, that somehow trying to build in modeled anticipation of forestry development based on the earlier presentation from the Forest Service, and thinking about, modeling future anticipated private landowner development or forest development might be a useful thing for stream temperature, but that's just my add at the last minute. So thanks. Great work, Joey. Really true.
Where is our green representative? All right, Jake.
Yeah, I think a lot of the ground that we covered has been covered, but one of the things that we discussed, utility and standardization of the actual sampling that we're doing, particularly time of year, the duration of those intervals. So it's like 20-minute intervals are common. Some of us do an hour. We need to think about how to assess that to help inform and input these models, but also time of year. Often we think a lot when people have to prioritize, looking at the warmest time of the year, devoting summer to data collection in many cases. Does that need to get expanded out to different seasons and more time of the year? Additionally, we talked about the value that would come from a centralized data set, repository of all these data that was searchable and usable by folks in this room. That answers the question. So I think everything else we probably have covered.
All right. Thank you, Jake. One more rep from an online group, Barb.
Yeah, Diane has a comment. Can I read that?
Oh, please, yeah.
It says Dartmouth College collaborated with the UVM to conduct a study on climate change and predicted changes on the landscape. The tree species predictions will absolutely influence groundwater and stream temperature.
Okay, thanks for that comment. And who is our last presenter from the online group?
Jen.
Jen. All right, Jen, you're with us.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So I'm representing a pretty small breakout group of 30 people, and all of us would align as more listeners rather than talkers when it comes to kind of what tools we need to make management decisions on the ground. But a lot of the same themes did emerge nevertheless, especially incorporating groundwater influence on surface water temperature in both small scale and regional models. The one that as best I can hear, I don't think we've mentioned yet, is how to convey uncertainty in large modeling efforts, given the heterogeneity of data availability to support these big kind of regional stream temperature and occupancy predictions. So thanks, Yoichiro, and I'd love to know how you're thinking about that for the future of your effort.
All right, Jen, thank you very much. And yes, we noticed that your group ended up being a little smaller. We had some other computers that were logged in that weren't necessarily meant to go into the breakout, and that's why. But we hope the three of you had a lovely conversation.
It was great. Thank you.
All right, and the last group we need to hear from here in the room is a rep from the red group. Who's the spokesperson on behalf of the red group?
We're looking at me.
Kind of 1, 2, 3, not it.
Yeah. So we represented, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Random Baptist, Arkansas. A lot of it's been covered, but, I think from a management standpoint, we, knowing where it will stake hold with climate modeling and be able to identify the zones. One thing that was specifically mentioned that we don't always think about is recharge zones within the watershed or the patch, the stream, and protecting them instead of just the stream corridor itself, if the groundwater might be coming from the source elsewhere, that we're not aware of, and being able to protect that. I thought that was a good topic. I don't know if that's been discussed much, but, USGS, getting more temperature monitoring stations on the current basis. If you look at nationally or the state map, you can see real-time flow data. If it's a drought, you can find the red spots. I think being able to visualize that from a temperature standpoint would be super helpful. Again, though, I know a lot of the temp stations are not at the level we're always concerned about from a brook testing point, but I think we can increase funding for that at least useful. Coordination among other states, and I've heard standardization and monitoring, but just what are the states finding out with their temperature monitoring that would be beneficial in the whole book out. I understand that one of these. Am I missing anything else? Guys, any questions? The second question,